Okay, this feels weird, but I want to try something new, and I'm gonna go ahead and maybe do analyses of books or things that I want to read. I don't know what direction I want to take it, but for now, I think I just want to get comfortable with the platform, and maybe I don't know, things will come together as it goes. But I think it's best to treat this video particularly as a podcast, maybe. My video editing skills are not going to be on point. It's going to be very homemade, but I think it'll be fun. I mean, I'm pretty confident that I have interesting ideas to share. It's just about finding the voice and the correct medium for all that. So let's start by, if you guys didn't already see the title, I wanted to talk about a sci-fi novel, The Dispossessed, by Ursula K. Le Guin. So let me just go ahead and read to you the little synopsis at the back. And it goes like, a bleak moon settled by utopian anarchist Anares has long been isolated from other worlds, including its mother planet Uras, a civilization of warring nations, great poverty, and immense wealth. Now Shevek, a brilliant physicist, is determined to reunite the two planets, which have been divided by centuries of distrust. He will seek answers, question the unquestionable, and attempt to tear down the walls of hatred that have kept them apart. To visit Uraz, to learn, to teach, to share, will require great sacrifice and risks, which Shevek willingly accepts. But the ambitious scientist's gift is soon seen as a threat, but in the profound conflict that ensues, he must re-examine his beliefs even as he ignites the fires of change. So, in my opinion, this is a very good book. Let me see how long it is. It is not very long, 400 pages, but they're tiny pages, like little pages. So it's not too bad. And it has, I think, its greatest strength is, and while the writing is good, like there will be parts where you can sort of get lost in the writing. I think the greatest strength of this, as most sci-fi novels are, is the concepts it plays with. Um, Almost all sci-fi that I've read so far, which is not much, is very not dry, but very clear cut. Almost like they're just playing with the concepts themselves, right? Obviously, because it's science. The only one that comes to mind that's different would be Dune. Dune is a lot more immersive, like normal other literature genres are. It's quite a lot more immersive than all these. These are more like cut and like cornered. Um, I will say what drew me in about this book in particular at the beginning was kind of like the uh, hearkening to communism, right? So it sort of takes that concept of like the first and second world, right? The first world, the capitalist, and the second, the communist, and takes it to a whole different extreme. Keep in mind, communism originally was not uh, a different thing from anarchism. They were sort of fashioned together at the same time. I believe there were a lot of anarchists that were communists and a lot of communists that were anarchists, but at some point there was a divide. I forgot their names, but the Russian ones, Kropotkin, and there was another one, were communists that eventually embraced more of an anarchism. I think the idea of the communist political entity came about with people like Lenin, I think, is when it was solidified. That was what made Lenin such an important figure. Lenin and his peers. But that was originally what drew me to the book. There's obviously also what drew me to science fiction in the first place is that I mean, most of us that are educated or that go through schooling in the public education system, right? Science is a very kind of like it's put on a pedestal in a lot of areas. Like obviously in public education, it's put on a pedestal more than a lot of other areas of knowledge. Almost undeservingly in a lot of ways, or that was the feeling that I got. It was more of a feeling, less of a conclusion. But it was almost like an arbitrary pedestal that it was put on. I think coding and comp sci might be taking over that position, and it's going to be less more about traditional science and more about the hype about computer science and all that. And obviously, everybody's learning computer science now in public schooling, which was not a thing when I was growing up. I mean, we had computers, but really you just played games on them, which developed into another addiction, which was gaming, but that's a whole different story about me. Um, what was I talking about? Oh, yes, when it's talking about mathematician, it's a physicist, right? So, physics is sort of at the intersection of mathematics and the physical world, so mathematics and science. That's why it's sort of viewed more as a pure science. Um, I was really curious about how all that played out. Obviously, physics also played a very big role in the Cold War, right? Uh, there was the race for space, the race to the moon, or whatever it's called. So physicists were and mathematicians were at the front of all that competition. So this is very much fashioned and plays with that era of history. Uh, Let me see. When was it written? 1974 is the copyright. So yeah, very much a product of its time in that sense. So I wanted to immerse myself in that a little bit, you know. I wasn't born there in that time. So I wanted to see sort of like the inspiration of where the author took all of that. And I think I was satisfied with the choices that she made. I think they were good choices. Um, so let me put forth sort of the foundation of the book. There are spoilers. The foundation of the book is a planet and its moon, I believe, in some distant system of astronomical bodies like a solar system or something else. And these are not humans, they are a different species. The humans in the book are referred to as Terrans, and they do make an appearance, but not, well, they make an appearance in person eventually, but they're more of a competing entity to the people of Uraz and Anaris. There's also other species or other sort of like humanoid peoples. I forgot their names, but they were responsible for some invention. I believe it was a ship. So there's been a lot of sharing of information between, like, you know, in this reality of the book that it's set in. The information has been shared between civilizations that have been growing, that grew apart in different environments, right? It's kind of like a interstellar world already, which is common in science fiction. Um, it captures the imagination. Uh, the people of Uraz and subsequently the people of Anaris, which are basically a colony of Uraz on the moon, um, they have customs that are a little bit flipped when compared to what you think of us as humans having these social and political customs, right? The only thing that remains the same really is the political ones, which are the anarchist, the authoritarian regimes and all that that's still happening on Oros, and they're still fighting that fight. And a lot like Dune, there's also the talk of the prophets, right? Or the talk of the spiritual stuff. Um, there was a prophet, her name I forgot. I should really review the whole thing before I do a video essay on it, but she was the one that took the people from Uras to Anaris to the moon. Odo is her name. Odo took the people from Uras to Anaris to live and to find, and they found or established a different society. So the society on Anaris, which describes itself as utopian anarchist, right? So Odo was the one who led that whole expedition. And what they did is they took themselves, cleansed themselves completely of anything that could be from Oros, any germ, any disease, anything like that. They sort of sterilized everything before they landed on the moon, and they made a brand new start, um, all backed and founded. Foundation of it being anarchist ideals, right? No property. That was their whole thing. I forget the exact words of the prophet Odo, right? But I think the gist of it is that property is the evil that was wrong with Uraz, and that the people of Anaras were a community and they were not going to succumb to the evils of that. So yes, they cleanse everything, they landed on the moon, and they cut ties completely with the people of Uraz. Except at some point there is a spaceship that comes in every once a year, which is the one Shevek ends up, the scientist in the book, ends up using to get to the planet from the moon. So there's a lot of turmoil in both these societies, both the moon and the planet. On the planet, there still exist all the turmoil that the people in the moon ran away from. So, the different nations, different entities. There's obviously still property, and still there is a very capitalist, run situation. And the people on the moon, they are experiencing the same things basically, but from their vantage point of ideological purity. So they strive for an ideological purity, which is something that I think most communist nations strived for as well. And these people on the moon, what ends up happening is by striving so much for that ideological purity, they sort of end up breaking it, right? So there is still that selfishness, there's still all of the same things that there are on the planet of Anarians, but it all ends up taking a different manifestation, right? Because you have to deal with the foundations of that society and its laws, which are fundamentally against property. But which I think leads to the conclusion mainly in the book, which there's something else at work, not just property itself, that makes the people of this planet and moon, or the beings of this planet and moon, the way they are and the way they function and their selfishness. So that was the main gist and the main takeaway of the book. Obviously, the people on the moon, they have scarcer resources. Um, there's less for them to work with, but they still end up working with whatever they have to survive. The people on the original planet, they get the bounty of that Earth, right? They get the bounty of everything that we can find on our planet, for example, right? The moon is more barren, just like our moon. But their moon still has the capacity for life. It has an atmosphere and has weather patterns and all that. It's not as barren as ours. And but the people of the planet, they still have to struggle to survive as well, but it ends up manifesting differently, right? So the key here, I think the book itself is just, and what Shevek, his whole purpose is to bring back the two worlds into one. That is kind of like what the book ends up moving towards, is bringing everything together at the end. So things are not that different. Time has passed, right? Um, Now we have a little difference, but really it's the difference that was created by that time passing. It wasn't that there was any difference to begin with, right? When the rupture happened, when the people fled the planet for the moon. The difference that drove them was not what the difference of time has produced, right? Sort of like the key difference there, the small subtle situation. But now they are caught up in this sort of uh, they are caught up in they're frozen, both of them. Um, so the hope, because there always has to be a hope, the hope the author seems to suggest, and the book itself seems to um, suggest as well, is science. So the hope is that science can bring them back together. The hope is that the capacity for them to work together for a grander purpose can bring those two worlds that were ruptured into one again. Um, and yeah, that is the hope of the book. Now, it doesn't, in this book, I think there are more books in the series. But in this one, this is just the beginning of all that happening. And it happens through Shevak the scientist. He's the main catalyst for all that. And you can sort of see that, hey, as a main character, he knows he is being pushed around by forces that are grander than him. He himself is not a being like, for example, the prophet Odo was to his society. He is just letting the things wash over him while taking control of his own life, right? So he wants to find the balance of controlling and being the master of his own life, while at the same time knowing that he has the purpose of being the catalyst that brings, the spark that brings those two worlds together. Um, his whole the ace that he controls, the ace in his arsenal, basically, is his theory. He wrote papers for the Society of Scientific, whatever the Department of Science for on Anaras, that were sent back to Uraz and caught the attention of the scientists over there because they seemed to, I forget what the specific thing was, but it ran counter, or it ran in a different direction than the people in Uraz had been going. And it created a curiosity, and it created a necessity by the governments and the people of Uraz to keep track of the people of Anaris, right? Sort of how um, people that are more powerful are going to try and have control over all knowledge and make sure they don't fall behind, right? Because Oraz, the planet, still is the power source of that universe. The moon, the whole purpose of the moon, again, was to establish its own thing apart so that they didn't interact at all. So they're clashing. There's a clash. And we get to see in the book people living their lives, and we get to see certain stereotypes or certain ways that people normally tend to function, right? Like, for example, you have uh, the scheming politicians, you have the flatterers, right? People who flatter. Um, you have the ones who only want to use you for the politics. You have the ones who want to use you for your knowledge. You have people who want to use you left and right, at least for Shevek. And he understands ultimately at the end of the book that, and he goes back, well, spoiler, he returns to his home, right? The moon, which is his home now, but his ancestral land is the planet. So he returns to the moon, and his driving force is his family on the moon. So that's why he needs to go back. He left behind something that was very important. Um, so it's a very kind of heartwarming end. He gets to go back to his family. He gets to, um, he understands that there's something bigger than him happening, but he also understands that he has the right to himself, um, which is a very good conclusion. I'm very happy with this book in general. Um, Let me see if I can remember anything else. Um, yeah, so it's people fighting over knowledge, people fighting over data. Um, there's a little bit of the conditions on the moon. I think that was very interesting, sort of like seeing conditions that to me are very similar to conditions of countries that were embargoed during the Cold War, countries that had to fend for themselves, right? Uh, where you are basically in a bubble, in a moon, and you have to work with the resources that are available and nothing outside of that land. Um, so that was a very nice take, and I think the author did a very good job there. Um, and it embodies a lot of the sentiment that the world keeps going regardless of what you're doing. It's going to keep moving, and it'll just keep, the sun will keep setting and it'll keep rising, right? And people will keep being people, and they'll keep on keeping up. Other than that, I think this ended up being a short synopsis in a sense of the book. Like I said, my analysis of the writing is that you really have to be interested in the concepts to enjoy the writing, or you really have to like science fiction in general. Not particularly, it's not a very long book, so even if you don't like science fiction, you can give it a try. I think it's a very good introduction to science fiction, I would say. Uh, you do see the clash of cultures. Uh, that's something else. Clash of cultures, which obviously happened as the world, uh, you know, was conquered under colonization for us. There was a very, very much a drastic clash of cultures there. Um, Here it's not as drastic. You can sort of see the beginnings. Well, again, they are the same people. They've been in time capsules basically from themselves for some time. But you can see the beginnings of the clash of culture. It could develop into something else. It could develop into a commentary on what happened in our world. It doesn't have to. Um, but you can sort of see the beginnings, right? When you approach somebody that you don't know, you have certain things in your head about how things work, and the way they do things might not be the way you do things, and there's the clash. Um, for Shevek and for the people of this world, it appears to be much more, uh, they appear to be much more empathetic or much more sort of lenient, much more trusting, but that trust, it appears that they still have the common way of functioning together, right? Like that trust stems from them knowing their history together. So it's not a full-on clash. Um, but you see a little bit of the stereotypes between the two cultures, right? The way the things they wear, their hygienic practices. Um, and you do see the similarities between them too, because they are the same species, right? They are the same people. Other than that, I think this book is an excellent, uh, just an excellent rendition of an era. It speaks well to what happens when people sever each other on such a big scale. Um, and I feel like our world today has moved very past away from that. We're not trying to be apart from each other. We're all trying to be one together, um, which is what it is. It could develop, you know, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. That is a whole topic on its own, what the world decides to do with the people that exist in it. Um, but yeah, this has been nonstop of me talking. I think we should treat it like a podcast. I mean, a podcast by itself, it's kind of boring because it's only me here just talking. So it's kind of like a little audio book situation, right? Um, let's see. Let's actually read the tombstone of Odo. So it says Laia Asio Odo. Her gravestone reads, "To be whole is to be part. True voyage is return." So yeah, Odo is a very interesting character because a lot of what she says is very ambiguous, very up for interpretation, something that equals prophets from different religions that we have, right? They are sort of ambiguous to the point where they invite interpretation. But they invite interpretation so that the ambiguity can be lost. But some people get lost in the interpretation and not in the ambiguity itself. It's a very philosophical, spiritual take. But yeah, nothing against religious interpretations. But the ambiguity existed in the beginning for a reason. It wasn't so that it could be solved like a puzzle through interpretation, right? And not in that sense. So I'll just leave it at that. Uh, please comment if if you see this, or interact. I would love to see that. I don't know what I could possibly do next. It was fun reminiscing about this book. I ordered it on a whim online. I tend to do that, and half the time I don't end up reading the books, which is a shame. But this one definitely caught my eye, and you know when something really catches your eye and it really just immerses you in something else. Um, I have a lot of other reviews I could do. I have a lot of topics I could talk about. Um, I am very bad at organizing. That is my problem. So if I could organize, that would be a very wonderful skill for me to develop. I think if I continue doing videos, it is inevitable that I'd have to organize and I'd have to come up with um, something substantial, not just me talking in front of the camera, right? But this was very fun. It feels like it wasn't great to me, but it's just the beginning. Mm, yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you've stuck to the end, uh, let me know if there's anything I said or anything that you would like to add. Um, I'll be responding to the comments. I love interaction, so please interact, like, um, you know, comment, and yeah, thank you so much.